Hi, I wanted to go over adjustment layers. Now, I know we're doing some digital painting, but I wanted to show you with an image just because sometimes it's easier to see what's going on in the image than with the painting. So, let me click actually in Photoshop here. I got this picture. Now, adjustment layers are all going to be here. If you want to see this window, if you're not already seeing it, you can go to Window and then Adjustments and it will pop up. All of these you can hold your mouse over, and if you look up here, it kind of tells you what each one is. I'm only going to go over about half of them. Photo filter and some of these are more stylized, which I would recommend that you take a look at, but I want to kind of go over the base ones. Now again, if I click on this, brightness contrast, you'll see that it's going to affect my entire layer. Let me set these to 0 real quick. If you had multiple layers under here, it will affect anything that's underneath it. All right? So, if you want it to only affect a certain part, what you're going to want to do is make a selection first. I'll show you what I mean. You can also use this as a mask, a layer mask. If you would like me to go over that, I can. If not, we can just kind of focus in on the adjustment layers. So I'm going to delete this real quick. So for an example, if I make a selection of the window here, and again, you can clean it up. If I then make my adjustment layer, you'll notice that it's only going to affect my selection. You can also see in this layer mask that only that little spot that I selected is white, which means that's what the layer mask is affecting. The only last thing I will say, let me grab Norman here. And I'm going to deselect the window. And I just copied and pasted. And I'll just move them over. I know it's a very weird selection, but to get the point across. So when you have multiple layers and you do an adjustment layer, it affects everything, right? It affects every layer that's underneath it. Let's say I only want this to affect my layer 1. I can do what's called a clipping mask. If you right mouse click on the brightness and contrast layer and go to create clipping mask, you'll see that little arrow right here. That means it's only affecting the layer right underneath it. You can see that this one is much darker than that one. You can also just move your layers around. So if I only wanted it to affect my bottom layer, I can just place my layers on top. All right. So the base of using adjustment layers is there. Now let's talk about what some of these do. Brightness and contrast. Pretty standard. Changing how close to white or how close to black, how much light was let into the camera when the picture was taken, and then contrast. I'm going to bring this back to 0. If you remove all contrast, every color tries to go towards a middle gray, aka the light tries to go towards a middle gray. If we increase the contrast, the lights go higher to white and the darks go closer to black. I generally like a little bit of contrast. It's nice to add some dimension. Now we have levels and curves. These are very similar in what they do, but they do them in a different way. So, levels. If you look here, this graph represents the tones that I have in this image, towards black and towards white. You can see I have a lot of pure white and light tones and just a little bit of black. You do want to make sure whenever you're kind of creating a piece that you have a nice range. The reason why this has a lot more white, you can see I've got a lot of white in the fur, you know, getting out to the outdoors here. This was very close to white. These black regions are going to be, you know, his nose, his eyes, maybe a little bit in the chair here, down here. But again, these are like kind of how many pixels that you have in this color range. So what I can do is pull, I'm clicking and dragging on this hanger. What I'm doing by moving this is saying any kind of colored pixel that's to the left here, I want to make that a pure black. So you can see how it really darkened that area. I can do the opposite. I can say, hey, I want even more of these pixels to be a pure white. Okay, and I can always grab the middle and say I want my midtones to become darker or to become lighter. It's nice to add a little bit of darkness there. All right. You can always look at the custom ones. Generally, I like to just kind of move them on my own. So now, if we look at curves, it's a similar thing, just like I said. So we have the same histogram graph that we talked about before, but we have this line here going from our black and black to the white and white. So you can click anywhere on this graph. If I click right in the middle, it's my midtones. Do I want to bring those up towards white or down towards black? Cool thing with this, I can move it up and down as well. So, you know, maybe I'm trying to just get those highlights. Maybe I just want those shadows. You can create S-curves with this. So you can really increase the contrast through here. And you will notice that a lot of these do a similar thing. So I'm increasing contrast here. I could have just used a brightness contrast. So be careful if you are laying multiples of these on top of each other that you're actually needing them and it can't be done in one. So let's see. Increase contrast. You can check out the different curves that are actually made. You can also, with any of these, just take a look, you can go in and grab specific colors. I am in an RGB color scheme, that's why I have RGB here. So you can say, you know what, I only want the reds, or green, or blue, or whatever you want it to be. So it's a nice way to kind of change your color in there. I think a common one that you're going to use is Hue Saturation. So, hue, I'm going to click on colorize here. You can change the hue or the color of your piece. Now, depending upon what you have selected, you may not want it all to be a similar color. You can kind of go through and adjust. The only thing is, it's not going to turn it, like if I bring it towards the red here, it's obviously not red. It's taking into account the different colors and adjusting them across a scale. So you just have to kind of scroll through to see the color that you want, or if you want to colorize the whole thing, then it kind of matches. Saturation, how much of that color is present, how vibrant. This can easily get pushed too far. You can desaturate and bring it to grayscale. But, you know, we can add a little bit, create some nice greens here. Lightness, again, close to white, close to black. This lightness is different than our brightness, and then it will actually paint your entire thing white or black, depending upon how far you go, of course. Now, I want you to be aware, again, when I increased the saturation, it got very crazy. So Photoshop is trying to think of the colored pixel that's there and really crank it. So you're seeing colors that might not even be there. You can always click on the icon if you close this window. A lot of times we don't want that saturation. Saturation is good if we're dealing in environments, but a lot of times with people, animals, we don't want saturation. We would actually like vibrance. So vibrance includes a saturation panel. You'll notice that when I increase the saturation here, it doesn't get as crazy in the hue saturation. It's more of a natural saturation, but The vibrance takes into account the undertones of the pixel and what it's actually made of. So you can see, I don't know how clearly it comes through, but vibrance is just adding a nice, realistic tone to just make it more colorful, more vibrant. But saturation, again, just tries to pull a color to the extreme, not taking into account undertones and color. So if you use saturation on a human, a lot of times our skin will turn red or orange or green even, depending upon what the other undertones are. But I think vibrance will be a commonly used one, and when you're digitally painting, you can get away with saturation a lot more. Exposure, we're dealing with light into the camera, dealing with the midtones and the fog. Again, you can custom, you can just adjust. This is trying to be like if it were in your camera and you had adjusted the exposure when you took the photo. Color balance, how towards a different color do you want it to be? A lot of times when this is how you would deal with your white balance. So if, you know, I had something here and I was like, you know, this is supposed to be a pure white, but it looks very yellow, you could go in and kind of adjust to where you see this as being white. Generally, it starts with your midtones. You can go into the shadows or highlights. And again, if you're digitally painting, most of the kind of base ones are going to be enough to adjust. But depending upon what you add to it, you might need some more. Black and white converts it to a black and white. You can edit the contrast in the specific colors of the pixels. All right, and again, you can look at these bottom ones. It's a real quick, I would probably just open a photo, invert, you know, you can get that crazy kind of look. You can create kind of an artistic, painterly kind of look. I want to see you actually paint things though, so. All right, if you have any questions, let me know.